Hey everybody, it's Courtney and I'm back here with another Christmas in July card with Simon Hurley Create. Today I'm going to be using the new Snazzy Snowman stencil as well as this tree from the Caroling Squad stamp set. So I'm starting off with a piece of the Stark White cardstock, also by Simon Hurley. I'm using my Misty here and lining up my images. So I want my little snowman to be wearing this hat and also holding this string of lights. So I'm placing down my snowman even though I'm not stamping that yet, placing the little hat and the string of lights right over top, closing my Misty door, removing the snowman stamp, and then I can go ahead and stamp out my little hat and string of lights. I'm going to be using some Copic Safe ink. This is the Ink on 3 blackout ink. And this is the first time I'm using this stamp set. So I did end up stamping all of the images twice just to make sure that I got a really nice bold black outline. And once it's stamped onto my card panel, I'm also going to take a piece of masking paper. And this is Simon's stamp masking paper. And I'm going to stamp these images out on that as well. Now, I was initially, silly me, going to try to cut out all of these little lights. That was not going to happen, but I was able to cut out the little hat. So I did mask that out. And for the little lights, I'm not worried about the string, but for the lights themselves, I'm going to be using some masking fluid by Nuvo. And I'm just squeezing a little drop onto each one of these little lights. This will take a little bit of time to dry. It took like 10 minutes or so. And once it is dry, it will dry completely clear. Then I can realign my snowman right in the place where I had him before, making sure that his little hands, I guess you could say, are touching each end of the string of lights and that the hat is placed right. And then I can stamp him down. And again, I stamped him twice and then also stamped him onto the masking paper. Now you'll notice when I cut out the mask for him, I didn't bother to cut out his arms because they are super skinny, and I figured I can just use the masking fluid for that as well. So when I went through my fussy cutting, I just kind of pretended that those arms were not there. Went ahead and lined that up, and I typically line up for a shape like this. Believe it or not, the simple shapes are the hardest to line up when it comes to masks. So I try to find the most intricate area. And in this case, it was really only his little carrot nose, lining that up first and making sure the rest kind of just falls into place. Added that masking fluid on top of his little arms there, let that dry for another 10 minutes or so, and then I'm going to stamp this large tree from the Caroling Squad stamp set off to the right-hand side. It's hanging off my panel a little bit, but that's okay. Went ahead and stamped this out twice again with that blackout ink. This is a huge tree, guys. This is good take up your entire panel. You don't need any other images. This would do it. So I also stamped that onto the same masking paper, fussy cut that, and lined that up on top of my image. Now you want to make sure that your masking fluid is completely dry before you move on to the ink blending. Now I am going to take some more masking paper. Couldn't think of the word. And I'm just cutting curvy lines, basically, just sections. And this is going to be my little snowy hills. Now, they don't have to be perfect. I'm freehanding this. You can certainly use a die if you feel more comfortable, but I'm kind of just cutting them in different shapes a little bit. I mean, they're all basically the same shape, but some of them are a little bit larger than the others. And I'm kind of just laying those down onto my panel to see what else I may need, how they're going to line up. And again, I'm just freehanding it. I can adjust it as needed. So I'm going to start off by laying down that first little hill. You want to lay down the hill that's closest to us first. So I'm going to lay that down right in the lower left-hand corner, right underneath my little snowman. Then I can line up the other two little hills there. And I did have to end up trimming this one down just a little bit more than I intended to begin with, but that's all right. You don't need any of the negative spaces here, so it's no big deal if you have to make adjustments as you go. So once my little snowy hills are down, we can move on to the ink blending of the sky. I'm going to be using one of the ergonomic blending brushes by Pink and Main, and I'm using the Midnight Snack ink pad, which is one of the new colors, as well as the Remember Me. Now, I use these brushes a lot and I never cleaned it. I usually clean them at the end of the day. I didn't clean it. So I'm just kind of scribbling off onto my scrap piece of paper to kind of get any of that excess ink off. And you really don't contaminate your ink pads when you use these type of brushes. So I'm laying a little bit down of that Remember Me towards the bottom, and then I'm going to go in with that really dark blue. And I'm kind of just gradually building up my color. This is a really, really dark blue. And I want the darkest area to be to the very top of my card panel. And I'm kind of just working that down. I'm not adding too much ink to my ink blending tool each time. I'm kind of just dabbing it on there because I don't want to add too much at one time. I want to kind of gradually build up that color and gradually blend that out. Once I was happy with the placement of that really dark blue, I'm going to go back in with that Remember Me, which is just a little bit lighter. You can see that I used a very light hand the first time around, and now I can add a little bit more pressure to it. I can add a little bit more ink to that brush and a little bit more pressure and get these two blues to kind of blend a little bit together. Did have to go back a few areas to fix them up because quite honestly, the Remember Me is quite a bit lighter, but it ended up working out well. I took some shimmer spray just for the background. You can use plain water here. You can use pretty much anything you have in your stash. Shake that up real good, and I'm just using the little nozzle there to sprinkle that on and then dab that up with a paper towel. Now for the little snowy hills, we are going to add a little bit of ink to these as well. Here I am just scribbling out my brush again on my scrap piece of paper because I'm too lazy to go clean it. And this time I'm going to bring in the Clear Skies, which is a really light blue. And I'm going to remove one hill at a time. So I'm just removing this top hill, and I'm starting right on the mask underneath it and kind of working up a little bit, tiny bit, and it's going to look like you have no ink down at all. It's still going to look white until you start removing the other masks, and then you're going to be able to see the dimension that you get. So I'm going to remove the next mask and do the same thing. Just start off on the mask or off the paper a little bit and gradually just add a little bit of that color, and then finish off with this final little hill here, and which was really stuck down. I had a hard time getting that up. But this time I'm just going to start off the paper and add just a little bit to the bottom portion of the card panel. Now, I would recommend you let your panel dry for about 5 or 10 minutes before removing your masks, but I'm not patient, and I was already patient with the masking fluid, and that's just asking way too much to wait even longer. So I went ahead and removed the masks. They are wet, not just from the ink, but they're also wet from the shimmer spray. So sometimes your masks are going to tear, and you can see that mine really did tear quite a bit. I ended up using the tip of my scissors to try to get those started a little bit. Let your masking paper tear. If it's going to tear, let it tear. You just don't want to tear your card panel. If you try to save your mask, you're going to end up tearing the paper itself, and you'd rather lose the mask than the card panel. So for the areas of the masking fluid, I am going to take a regular eraser to remove these. You do not want to use a sand eraser here. I'm just using a regular pencil eraser, and I'm going over it very lightly. I'm barely adding any pressure at all, and it will kind of just like pop off those little areas, and it will kind of be a little bit gummy, but that's exactly what you need to do. If you use a sand eraser, or add too much pressure, you're gonna rip the panel. So there are a few areas that I didn't exactly line up my mask correctly, so I'm just taking a Copic marker to get rid of those little white outlines that you sometimes get around your images. Also, I'm not great with the masking fluid, so I kind of went out of the lines with that as well. So moving on to the Copic coloring, I kept this one pretty simple. For my little snowman, normally I would use grays for this because obviously a snowman is white, but being we have so much blue, I kind of wanted to bring that out. So I'm using the BV04 as my darkest color. I'm adding just a little bit of shading on either side of him, concentrating to the left just because I guess if I had to pick a light source, it's going to be my Christmas tree. And I also added a little bit of shading underneath each one of the little sections of the snowman. Blended that out a little bit with the BV02 and the BV00, and you can see the BV00 is not very light, and you can get those harsh lines that are kind of between the white paper and the BV00. So I'm going to bring in a C00. This is almost a colorless blender. It's very, very light, but I'm going to kind of start where I left off with that BV00 and kind of blend that towards the white area, and this will kind of give you more of a seamless blend and you won't get those harsh lines. So for his little hat here, I'm going to be using some cool gray markers as well as my black marker. Now, like I said, this is the first time I've used this stamp. So a lot of times, the first couple times you use this stamp, it doesn't stamp the best. And the inside of his little mouth is supposed to be black, and it was, but it was a little blotchy. So I'm just going to very carefully go over that with my black Copic marker. I definitely would recommend you using a Copic Safe pen here, but I just didn't feel like looking for it. It is not where it's supposed to be, which means that it could be anywhere. Not only in my craft room, it could be anywhere in my house. So I wasn't going to look for it. I was just super careful. Just keep in mind that if you do use a Copic marker, if you go out of those lines at all, it will spread a little bit in the areas that we've already colored. So for his little carrot nose there, nope, first I colored his little arms. And here's where I realized I didn't remove that masking fluid. So I took my eraser to remove that, colored in his arms solid because they are so tiny. For his little carrot nose, I'm just using a 2-color blend here. And honestly, you can't even tell that I used 2 colors because they were so similar to one another. For the little holly leaves in his hat, I'm going to, again, just use 1 single color here. There's just not enough room to do any shading, and that's fine. Nobody's ever going to know the difference. For the little berries and for the ribbon around his hat, I did use 2 colors, but again, they were so similar. Reds are hard, and I didn't want to overblend because they tend to bleed. So it's pretty much just a solid color. So for the tree, for the Christmas tree, I'm going to use 4 different greens. And the way I like to color Christmas trees that are drawn like this in sections kind of, is I add my shading underneath each one of those sections in flicking motions. And I like to start right with my darkest color. So I'm starting with that G29, and where one section hangs over another section, I'm just adding the flicking lines. And I did end up extending those quite a bit. You can see that I'm going right over these little lights on the tree, and we're going to cover those up later, so I'm not worried about trying to go around those. I'm going to extend those flicks out a little bit further with the G24 and do the same thing with the G21. And I'm not leaving too much of a highlight area here. I am going to go in with the G20, which is a really, really light green. But you'll notice that I'm going to start off with the opposite side of each one of these sections. So it's the bottom part of each section and work my way up. Just keep in mind the lighter the color, the more it's going to act as a colorless blender. So you don't want to go over the darkest areas with the lightest color. For the tree trunk, I'm just going to bring out a few browns. I'm going to add a little bit of the shading where the tree trunk is kind of hanging behind the rest of the tree, I guess you could say. And I'm just using 3 different colors here. Now for the star, which you can see that my mask didn't really stick to where it needed to stick, and I'm a little bit off camera here, but I tried to cover it up. It just wasn't working. So I'm going to bring out some gel pens. These are the Jelly Roll pens, and they are the metallic. So gel pens tend to be opaque. The metallic ones, not as much. I tried to fix up that little star. Didn't really work, but I'm going to let that dry for a little bit and move on to the lights. So I chose 4 different colors here, and I'm just kind of sort of going in order. I kind of messed up the order a little bit, but a detail like that, nobody's ever going to count to make sure that you put the same amount of red as you did with green and you did with the blue, so don't stress that. And I'm also going to use these same colors for the little lights on the tree themselves. Now, this is why I wasn't really concerned with coloring over them, because I knew that the gel pen would cover up any of that green Copic markers that we used on the tree itself. And I used the same colors because I wanted to make it look as if the snowman is kind of decorating the tree. So obviously I would use the same lights. And now that the gel pen is dry where I put that over the star, I'm going to go in with a plain yellow. This is not a metallic gel pen. This is just a regular yellow gel pen. And I was able to get the shape of it a little bit more, but then I smeared it. I'm just going to go over that with a Copic marker once that is dry. So once everything is colored, I'm going to take a sentiment from the Snazzy Snowman stamp set, and I'm going to heat emboss this on my background because my background is so dark. I'm going to make sure that I treat this with my anti-static tool. We have a lot of ink down, and if that ink is not completely set into the paper, the embossing powder will stick to it. So you want to make sure that you treat that really good. Stamp that out with some Versamark ink and then sprinkled on some white embossing powder. And the good thing about leaving so much residue behind from your anti-static tool is that you can really see where you stamp with that Versamark and it comes right off once the embossing is done. So I let my heat gun heat up for about 30 seconds or so before bringing that to the paper. And then you'll want to make sure that your embossing powder is completely cooled down before rubbing that excess residue off the background. But that is it. That is the card for today. As always, I will leave the information and the supplies used in the description box below. Thank you guys so much for stopping by today and have a great day. Bye.